Today, I'm tackling the hardest part of the project, and he's put the massive V12 inside the project car. So this is going to be one of the hardest parts because it is big and heavy, but it's the original Zonda engine, so it's got that nice V12 sound, but I've got nowhere to mount it to, so I need to make all the mounts, all the supporting structure to hold this thing. It weighs 315 kilograms. So if it fails, it's going to be catastrophic. So now I need to make some pipes, join them on here, bring them out, test fit the engine on there, and then put some extra pieces in so I can see how it fits. This is going to be quite a challenging one. This is drawn over manual, seamless tube, the same as what the chassis is made from. I cut it in the dark just because it looked cool with all the sparks. Then I notched it using a hole saw. This is to ensure it'll fit on the frame really nice. I can get a nice good weld around there. Now they're cut, I can get them welded onto the frame at the right distance to hold them engine mounts. Now I've got the tubes cut, I need to remove the firewall so I can get these welded in place. Now that I've taken these parts off, I can get good access to the tube, exactly where the weld's going to be around this area. I can also level it to this bar here to make sure the whole chassis is level. A lot of this orangey brown on the tubes is actually the rust protection stuff itself. Is this stuff, which is actually like an orange goop, sometimes brown. So some of these rusty spots are actually just this. This bit's clean because that's where I've been clipping on for the welder. So now I can mark along here my centre point and then where exactly the bars need to go on each side. Now I've got it set up nice and straight to the rest of the chassis. If you like this video, give me a thumbs up. It takes a lot of work making these. That's the main bars done. I need to join these together, so I'm going to use another piece of tube, slightly smaller stuff. They'll join like this. In between the oil pan and the gearbox flange, there's a nice gap where I can have this bar. It won't get in the way, so I can slide the engine back and service the engine. So this smaller tube is also going to be used for the rear portion of the car beyond this point, because this telescopes inside this tube, so it actually fits in there nicely. So the reason I've done it like that is so if the rear of the car ever gets bumped, it's not going to destroy the chassis. I'll put a pinch bolt through there, M6 or M8 bolts, so they'll shear. If the rear ever takes an impact, it will damage the rear subframe, it won't damage the actual chassis itself. So that's why I'm trying to make this a stiff point. Now that the main structure's done, I'm going to lower the engine into place carefully. Then that will show me where these additional support pieces need to go, and of course where the engine mounts need to go down to. I need to build some kind of sled that joins onto here, because I want it to be able to slide on these pipes. That's why this pipe's slightly smaller than this stuff, because I want to use this as like a sled. So I can just pull bolts out and slide the engine back for front servicing if I need more space. Let's say if I need to like change the alternator or the air conditioning pump or something like that while it's in the car, I've got them options because I've made that room by the time I've slid it back. I'm going to use these big chunks of metal to get the engine at the right height. I've just set up these blocks so that the engine can sit at the right height. Then I can plan these mounts and see where these extra supports are going to go. So it looks like I need to trim some more of this temporary structure away so I can get it further in. Now the engine's changed height, there's a bit more stuff here, so it needs more clearance.
Even when you feel low, you can still go. Even when you feel slow, you can still go. Even when there's no hope, you can still go. I never answer to no, man, I still go. Go, 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 yo, go, go, go. Hustle hard, hustle every single day. I'll be making moves till I'm buried in my grave. To the system, I don't wanna be a slave. I've been doing my way, or the highway, and in the driveway is a nice range. Push the grind through the climb, I invite pain. And everything you do, nah, I don't complain. Just gotta flip the switch and you can go and obtain anything you want, anything you need. Your mind's got the key ingredient, it's the lead. Better see with the negativity, but I just slide right by that energy. Even when you feel low, you can still go. Even when you feel slow.
So that's the rear subframe reattached. It's quite difficult because I was trying not to move the chassis, trying not to bump it whatsoever. Normally I'd just like force the sides in because they're rubberized, they do move a bit. But in doing that, I noticed the chassis started to move, so I had to realign it again. So it's quite tricky, I had to do that 3 times. So now that subframe's on, I can start planning these tubes that are going to go here. I'm going to try and keep it parallel to this bar. That gives me as much space possible here for my fuel tank. The fuel tank's going to be quite slim. Then it gives me a lot of clearance to the engine, as well as space to do nice manifolds. So this is the first time I've had the engine at the proper height. So now the clearances are going to change on these bars. These bars take all the suspension load, or most of it. Some of the load will also go back down to the engine cradle. So it's like a shared system. All of the bits work together to make it really strong. So that's the first time trying it. It's actually looking really good. It's quite well centered. These intakes are going to have to curve quite steeply. That's going to be quite tricky because normally the throttle bodies sit right here on the end. I'm probably going to have to move the throttle body further down. I can either do that, or I can move these bars out by putting this on that side of the plate and welding an extra chunk on. Now that the engine's sat at the right height, I can start planning some of these other parts. I've fitted this throttle body just so I can see what clearance there is to this tube. I've ended up moving the tube out further, so I'm probably going to make another mount a little bit further out. I'll still use these ones I made previously to do the lower mount, and I might use it to still brace this part to make it really strong. So I'll make another plate for this side. This here represents the rear deck height in the middle, as well as it's showing me the exhaust positions, because I need to make sure the exhaust doesn't clash with these bars, which I think by the time it's up here and twisted, I'll have just enough room to sneak them out, because I'm making it like an F1 car or an Le Mans car style exhaust. So planning all that's obviously quite intricate as well. I'm making the engine slide back for servicing, so I need to leave enough room, clearance and everything for that. That's why I've moved this bar out further, so the throttle body can move past the bar. So when I service it, it'll be a case of taking the fuel tanks out, which would be like a quick disconnect, and taking off the intake part with the filter on it, which would be quite easy. If you go into all that effort anyway, you need to, because you've got to reach the bolts that are going to bolt the engine down there. But I'm just trying to make it as easy as possible to service. You can also see this bar here, which represents the corner of the fuel tanks. Then I have one tank over there, another tank over here, 50 litres each to make for 100 litres, which should be good for this. It's the same as the original Mercedes and the same as the Lamborghini Murcielago capacity, because that also has a 6 litre V12. So this will drink quite a lot of fuel, so I need to make sure it's got the capacity to go on road trips and stuff. So the reason I've set the fuel tank up is because it allows me to see where that crossbar can go, because obviously things start getting a bit more tight the more components I add. They're going to be a good 200mm or 8 inches away from the engine, so should be plenty of room there for heat to dissipate, as well as enough room for me to make my exhaust system, and then I'll coat the side with heat-proof material. So that's the pipe in place. As you can see, I've had to trim both sides quite carefully to make it fit. Each side is heavily angled in 2 directions. So I just had to keep cutting, trimming, test fitting, Took a lot of work, but that's finally there. So now I'm going to copy this on the other side, especially this top joint, and then I'm going to tack weld this in. So that's the shape of the top cut. It came out to be quite weird because I had to match two angles. The bottom one's not as tricky, but I'm going to copy this before I weld it in. So I've just took a bit of time to do some planning, and I've also painted up this first side of the rear subframe. This is just temporary rust protection. This is all going to get redone anyway, but I need to do the same with this side just to protect these spots. So these are areas where I've ground off previously so I can extend the subframe. I obviously don't want to go rusty, so that's why I've just sanded it back, given it a quick coat of generic black paint. I'm only keeping these outer parts. I'm not keeping these middle sections. These will be redone. So now I need to make the actual engine mounts that go from the stock engine mount down to this tube. So that'll be the final connection. These factory ones have actually sagged over time. It's quite common with the 90s Mercedes. So that actually helps me in this case because the replacements are actually going to be slightly taller, but then the engine weight on them is going to balance that out. So this is about the position it's going to be. There's also going to be extra reinforcement on this whole thing. I'm probably going to do another one of these bars down to this point and up to this top section. So that will give it extra strength, this whole thing. So this is my design for the engine mount support. It's the same way that the factory Mercedes bolted in to these stock mounts. So I'm going to bolt onto either side. I'm going to notch the bottom of this to fit onto this tube. There's going to be a piece in between to make a nice sled so that I can slide the engine back along this tube, and then I'm going to remake this out of steel. It should still be quite light because there's not actually that much to it. So we've got a top portion and some sides. So I'm using these because it has rubber isolation. These are also liquid filled, so it will stop some of the harsh vibrations transmitting through to the cabin, as well as it will protect the welds on all this engine support frame from fatigue. If the car goes over a big bump and the engine light moves ever so slightly, it won't shock load all of these joints. And it also protects the engine itself because there is some delicate sensors and things on the engine. So that's my piece of pipe ready to cut. Got my lines on each side. You can see there how the pipe popped open as I cut it. That's from the tension from when it was manufactured, when it was pressed through the die. So this is drawn over mandrel tube. This would have been pulled through a mandrel like extruding Play-Doh, but it puts some stress in the tube itself. You always get this because metal always wants to return back to its original shape. So that's the engine mount brackets. So now these should slide alongside that other tube. You can see with these scrap pieces that I've got, all the different sizes that I'm using. So the smaller stuff, the slightly bigger stuff, and then the biggest stuff. So this should just slide on top of that big stuff really well. So these slide on these rails. These will sit on the pipe like this, and then I can bolt through to anchor these down. And when I'm ready to move the engine, I can just pull these out. I can slide the whole engine back on this frame. Now that piece is done, I'm going to work on this upper plate, and then I can work on bridging the gap in between. Now I'm going to transfer this cardboard onto steel. So that's the first one, ready for drilling. So that's the top plate done, which is this part. Now I need to make these sides to join down to the sled. Here I'm using a piece of cardboard just to get the initial shape right. I really don't want to waste lots of time cutting steel. This cardboard technique's come in handy many times on lots of complex projects over the years. Now we need to remake that in steel. It's going to go on the inside just there. So that's the two sides finished on the engine mount. Now I'm going to try and take it off so I can finish weld it properly. think I should be able to tilt it back, just about get it out. That's going to be a little tight. There it is. Looks like I need to take off a little bit of material just on this edge. This side's flush, this side's slightly overhung, so that's what was catching. But there is some flexibility in this. So there's the basic shape. As we can compare it to the cardboard, you can see we're pretty close to what I intended. So now I need to box these in and then fully weld it out, because that's just, you know, tack welded together. Cleaned it all up, cleaned all the old crusty paint off from the outside and the inside. I flushed the front welds just to make it look a bit nicer. On the back I've left them a bit more chunky just for extra strength. So take a guess how much this weighs in the comments. I'm going to get this painted now and then we're going to fit it to the car. So there's the finished part. Painted it black, looks a lot better now. Really happy with how it's come out. So now let's see how much this weighs. Exactly 1 kilo. That's really good, saying it's steel. 3.5mm steel, designed to support over 300 kilograms, and it only weighs 1 kilo. Now I'm going to get these fitted to the car and then we can see how the engine looks. That's held on with these two M8 bolts. So that's the engine mounts done. I can't put the weight of the engine down onto the frame yet because I've not got the rear suspension done, so it can't handle the weight. And also, the way I've designed the car, a lot of the load goes up these bars, and the roof bars are currently temporary. That's why they're just really thin. The actual roof bars will be made out of the same drawn over mandrel steel, and then the load can go onto the chassis. And the chassis is designed to spread the load around the B pillar and the A pillar, as well as it's going to have the carbon fibre tub that's going to bond on the inside of the chassis to really stiffen this thing up. I'm going to be adding another one of these bars down from the same point down to this crossbar we put in, just to ensure that's absolutely solid. Now I'm going to refit the firewall just so we get an idea of how the car's going to be when it's finished. I think it's going to look really good. So that's the firewall installed. Now get a good idea of how the engine bay is going to be. It's going to be really cool. So it's inspired by like the engine bay of an F50 or a Koenigsegg. So I'm going to have some nice carbon wheel covers. Fuel tank's going to be either side of the engine. ECUs are going to sit in front of the wheels about here. I'm using this because I want that Zonda sound, because that's always been one of my dream cars. This how I'm going to get it is by, building my own Zonda inspired car. I'm not building a copy or a replica. I don't want to disrespect Horatio Pagani, who I've already met. I'd like to go back to Zonda factory one day, the Pagani factory, and take this build there, which would be really cool. So that's what you're going to see on this channel, is some of my car builds that I do, where I'm doing my own design. Thank you for all your support. I'm trying to make these videos really good and show my project. It takes a lot of time to record, but seeing the positive comments and the likes really keeps me going with the recording stage. Let me know what you're building in the comments. I like hearing about other people's projects. I hope you all enjoyed the spanner that I made and this other logo that I made. So I made them out of the scrap pieces for the firewall. This is going to be quite a challenging one because I've got this.
I love the chase and the hunt, and I set the pace when I'm running. I always take what I want and I always give it 100. Don't need a bank, no I'm funded. Play the game like it's nothing. I'm always thankful for something. Don't take for granted, stay humble. Now wake up. It's time to
Thanks for everyone that likes the videos and leaves positive comments, and that it really helps me record the next stage of the video, because there's just a lot of time goes into this. For every minute that you see, it's probably about an hour that I spend on that part, because I can't show like an hour of grinding or an hour of drilling. It's just so boring. So I only get to use 10 seconds of that footage, but it still takes me the hour to actually physically do it. So I can't put these out any faster because this stuff just takes a lot of time. As well as this is a dream build, I'm trying to make it really good, as good as I can with what I've got now. But also I'm making all the parts removable. So at a later stage, if I want to upgrade stuff, it's dead easy to replace stuff and upgrade.
better believe in your mind, cause it's everything. You can mold, shape, find almost anything. All it takes is some time and some clarity to find your identity. It's my